I had an extra set of flags delivered to my house, so I'd have a good background.
And you see the recording, then you're good to go.
I'm calling to order this hearing or roundtable. I guess it's a roundtable. This is a roundtable being conducted by the Committee of the Whole. I am Phil Mendelson, Chairman of the Council and Chair of the Committee of the Whole. Today is Friday, February 26, 2021. The time is 4:07 in the afternoon, and this hearing is being conducted virtually. That is, it is being streamed live on the committee's website, which is at www.chairmanmendelson.com/live. The hearing will be available on the council's website and cable TV within a few days after it is uploaded. The subject of this hearing is student learning loss. What is the district's plan? This is the committee's second hearing this month on this issue. The first was on February 10th on the subject of overcoming learning loss due to the COVID-19 pandemic in public education. The purpose of this roundtable is to receive testimony from invited guests and the Deputy Mayor for Education on the need for a comprehensive citywide plan and the potential strategies included in that plan to address the student learning loss that has occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic. The committee plans to hold future roundtables on this topic until satisfied that the executive has a plan, a comprehensive and actionable plan to combat student learning loss. I'd mentioned that the testimony was limited to invited guests and the Deputy Mayor, but I believe that the only witness who will be testifying is Paul Kine, the Deputy Mayor for Education, but also present, I believe, will be Shauna Young, who's the Interim State Superintendent, Office of the State Superintendent of Education, Dr. Louis Farabee, who's the Chancellor of the District of Columbia Public Schools, and Dr. Michelle Walker Davis, who's the Executive Director of the Public Charter School Board. So members will have an opportunity to ask questions of any of these agency directors, as well as the Deputy Mayor, who will be presenting a statement. Because we've limited the witnesses, that'll maximize time for members to ask questions regarding the executive's plan for overcoming learning loss. The learning loss that is attributable to the distance learning and the less than preferred teaching teaching environment that we would like in ordinary times. I want to add that members of the council or members of the committee of the whole, I guess it's the same thing, were pretty dissatisfied after the last hearing, the February 10th hearing, with regard to what exactly the government's going to do to help with overcoming learning loss. And this is a matter of importance, not just with regard to educational outcomes, which we want to see improve, let alone overcoming. But it's also a matter of great anxiety to parents. What are the plans? What can they expect? Will there be extended days? How soon? Will there be extended year? What are the plans for summer school? And parents have a right to be anxious to know what exactly the plan is. So this is important in multiple ways. I'm going to recognize members in, I believe, the order in which they've arrived. I would appreciate it if members would keep their opening statements to 3 minutes. I believe the first to arrive was Councilmember Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you very much for convening this again. There is so much urgency that is needed on this issue right now. And that's for our educators, for our students, and for our parents. I don't believe it's possible to actually overstate how frayed that trust is right now. When I'm picking up my kids, when I'm talking to other parents, it is what I'm hearing constantly from parents making decisions about their kids' future and their schools. And at the last hearing, we heard nothing that built trust. In fact, I think actually what we heard and the lack of responses damaged it. One of the things that concerns me overall as we look at this is that we learned in our written responses to questions for the last roundtable, the district does not collect any information on students' courses or credit across the whole city, which means that as a city, we do not have a sense of who is most at risk and what they need to graduate until it's too late. I'd like to know how the district is tracking student courses and credit through middle and high school grades during this pandemic. And why focus on that? Well, first, because we know that credit is one of the best predictors of graduation and dropout, better than test scores, for example. Second, the pandemic has clearly impacted school schedules and capacity, and therefore may have impacted course offerings and credit potential differently across the city. And finally, because we have very little time left with many of our high school students in public schools. Courses and credit tell us who's on track to graduate, who needs more targeted supports, and what those are and where those supports are most needed. And right now, we do not know how middle and high school students' trajectories have been impacted by the pandemic across the entire city at all. We're going by anecdote. This means that as a city, we don't have a sense of who is most at risk and what they need to graduate until it's too late. We throw ideas around to see what's going to stick rather than the deeply intensive and personalized plans that our students need and deserve. I'm also concerned that DCPS will not commit to using federal relief dollars on our school budgets because they're worried about long-term funding needs for their staff. School communities are in an absolute panic right now. They're concerned they're going to be losing teachers, they're going to be they're losing their social workers, and they're not investing in what our students are going to need right now. That approach to not commit to our federal relief dollars, I think, seems to be treating learning loss and recovery as this is just a short-term endeavor, but not the multi-year effort that it's going to be required. And let me just conclude by saying this. As we come up with what our learning loss plans are, as we come up with what our reopening and recovery plans are, we have got to make it a higher priority that the remaining teachers are given the opportunity to be vaccinated. Because whether that is to grow our term 4 in-person learning capacity or to be prepared for our summer, we got to make sure that capacity increases, and getting the remaining teachers is an important part of that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to hearing the remainder of the testimony today.
Thank you, Councilmember Allen, and I appreciate you keeping that to 3 minutes. Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much for hosting this extra roundtable today. As Councilmember Allen said, I think many of us had some frustration about what we heard during the last roundtable, and you know, I've already reviewed the Deputy Mayor's testimony today, and I just want to say that I think it's important for us to just state and be clear that still missing from this conversation are educators, families, and students. I had the opportunity to talk to students, to have teachers talk to students on my behalf, to get their feedback in terms of what they're looking for this summer. And, you know, we have, I don't know, 6 pages of testimony, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 paragraphs of that actually provide some concrete examples of what's going to happen this summer. But we still don't know. This is going to require a significant amount of coordination with educators, with our union partners, not just the WTU, but the unions that operate all of our school buildings. This is going to require some coordination with out-of-school time partners, with DPR, the Department of Employment Services, all of these different things. And so I'm hopeful in the conversation today we'll get a little bit more of an idea of what type of level of coordination is happening and when we will be able to provide some concrete tips and examples to families about what they can expect for this summer. I did a little research and looked back in 2019, and I know this was different pre-pandemic, but in 2019, we opened up the registration for DPR summer camps on February 25th. February 25th. And if you go to the DPR website now, it says we won't have information until April. How are families supposed to plan? Because we know that those slots are not always available. But also, what does that look like in terms of accelerator academies, et cetera? I also have some questions in terms of how charter schools fit in this. Because I don't think we have a clear understanding. You know, I think we focus a lot on DCPS, but I don't want to forget the 47,000 students who are serving in or who are taking classes and coursework in the other sector. So I thank you for hosting this today, and I look forward to the testimony and conversation thereafter.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Robert White.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I very much appreciate you holding this second hearing on learning loss. I'm incredibly frustrated because even today there still is no plan. We got an announcement this week that there will be a lot of money, but money is different than a plan. Our school budgets are already about $1 billion. We're going to add 150 million on top of it. But what we already know is that money does not equal good outcomes. And we know that because we're looking in the face of an almost unimaginable opportunity gap between our Black students, students of color, at-risk students, and their white counterparts. And that gap was already outstanding before the pandemic and has grown even deeper during the pandemic. So the need is so great. And yet there is no plan. And we've been in remote learning for a year now. It has been clear for at least 9 months that students were falling behind, that there was significant learning loss. So there are no surprises. The only surprise is that we are at this point and still don't have a plan. We have some kind of broad ideas of where we're going to be putting money into technology, teacher training, some aspect of tutoring, which is confusing because DCPS just cut out money that the council put in for Capital Partners for Education, which has a long track record of doing tutoring. So I just don't understand what's going on. What I think is going to happen here, based on the track record over the past year, is that the administration is going to develop a plan without teachers, without families, and drop that plan at a time when it is too late to receive any critical feedback and be baffled that people are frustrated. And so that's what we're exactly on track to do again. And at every point, we can tell that parents and teachers are not consulted, because I can tell you as a DCPS parent myself that I'm trying to figure out what I should be planning for the summer. Should I be looking for some type of summer camp or activity? Those lists are filling up. But as a parent, I don't know what the status of school will be over the summer. So you really have put so many families in a bind. Teachers, will they be working this summer? They would need to know that probably about now, because they have to plan around it as well. So Chairman, I appreciate you putting some urgency on this issue. I hope that we start to see more urgency from the administration on this, but at this point, we still don't have a plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Robert White. Councilmember Cheh White.
Good afternoon. I guess good evening now. Chairman Henderson and colleagues, I'm hearing the sentiments of my colleagues, and it's exactly how I'm feeling. I think this is an important roundtable. Even to be having a hearing at 4 o'clock on a Friday shows the urgency and the seriousness of this matter. I did see that according to DCPS, there were 48,000 plus students in the district who are committed to graduating from high school and prepare for college and work. How, I don't know. I just know DCPS website also says that about 4,000 teachers determined to live up to an unparalleled role in ensuring achievement of our students. I remember in the last hearing, there were some studies done and some data and some recommendations. So I took down notes during that time, and I used that as part of my question. Are we going to be doing year-round school? Are we extending school hours? What are we going to do to close the achievement gap? And then you see, we've been already in a pandemic as relates to education for our Black students, particularly our Black boys. And so this gap has widened. I'm afraid that we are going to produce another generation that's far left behind, disengaged, and not ready to be productive citizens in the career market, entrepreneurship, and college. And so I have a few questions tonight to get some answers, because I have to look at, I was at Thurgood Marshall today, speaking to the school leader today. And even though we're talking about public schools and public charter schools, there were a lot of questions, and he is prepared to address some of the needs. But I started thinking about how many other principals throughout the ward or teachers are not secure on their next steps in the next couple of months. And I think that we have to get some answers now so we can communicate and be ready for that. And with the amount of money we have in the budget, our kids should be, everyone should be getting tutors or some type of supplement to help them. I can hear through the vents right now. One of my sons is down there yelling, saying something, but I know for all this time throughout the day, they're down there studying. And I just feel like they're disengaged and their social emotional skills are in jeopardy. But we are in a place where we don't know what the future may hold for the education of our young young people. So I'll be tuned in, asking questions. Again, I want to thank you, Chairman, and my colleagues as we get some answers today.
Thank you, Councilmember Cheh and White. Councilmember Bonds. Councilmember Bonds, I believe you're there. I'm going to go to Councilmember Cheh, and then Councilmember Bonds, if you can materialize, we'll call on you after Councilmember Cheh. Councilmember Cheh? All right, I think we're having technical difficulties, but I'm going to proceed to the witness. And I'm moving slowly in case Councilmember Cheh or Councilmember Bonds materialize. I don't believe any of the executive have been let in. Would you let them in? Deputy Mayor Kine, why don't you proceed when you're ready? And I'm correct that you're the only one making the statement.
That is correct. That is correct, Chairman.
Okay. Please proceed, and good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairman. Yes, good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson and members of the Committee of the Whole. Thank you all very much for reconvening us on this incredibly important topic. Joining me today for questions, as the Chairman said, are Interim State Superintendent of Education, Shauna Young, Chancellor of the District of Columbia Public Schools, Dr. Louis Farabee, and the Executive Director of the DC Public Charter School Board, Michelle Walker Davis. We remain in the throes of a serious health emergency. Over 40,000 residents have contracted the virus, and tragically, more than 1,000 residents have lost their lives. We are all working around the clock to try and stay ahead of the virus and protect our community. Due to Mayor Bowser's leadership and DC Health's extraordinary work, the district has been recognized as a national model for our efforts related to testing, healthcare capacity, contact tracing, and now vaccinations. I also want to acknowledge that due to the ongoing circumstances of the pandemic, we still have a challenging local budget. As you will recall, last year we were forced to strip over $500 million from our fiscal 20 local budget. Across government, we continue to identify budget reductions in the current year, at the same time as we develop a more constrained fiscal 22 budget than any of us would like. These are real cuts to programs that impact residents and represent difficult choices about program options across district agencies. These difficult choices have undoubtedly created delays in spring and summer planning for many families across the district, and we recognize and understand the hardships we are all facing as a city and appreciate the grace of the DC community as we work together to rise up from this crisis. That is why a vital part of the fiscal 21 reappropriations and the fiscal 22 budget will be focused on our recovery and planning efforts, which we are approaching in 3 phases: an immediate response phase, a recovery phase, and a longer-term reimagine phase. I cannot emphasize enough that the most critical part of our long-term strategy to recover from the pandemic and accelerate learning is occurring right now in schools throughout our city. Our best approach to mitigating learning loss is ensuring students receive the highest quality teaching and learning experiences we can provide in their current school. This is our current response phase. In it, we continue to focus our attention on ensuring that all students experience high-quality virtual schooling by providing innovative online curriculum, much-needed access to technology, supporting our teachers' transition to virtual teaching, partnering with families as they take a larger role in their students' learning, and working to get students safely back into school buildings, especially students who need to be in person the most. As of today, DCPS has welcomed almost 10,000 students back for term 3. Our public charter community is currently providing in-person learning activities for almost 4,000 students, with plans to expand to 9,000 by the end of March. Of course, months of planning and significant investments went into making this possible. In DCPS, this included $24 million investment in medical grade HVAC enhancements, PPP for every student and staff member, a comprehensive safety MOA negotiated with our partners in the Washington Teachers Union, the launch of community reopening cores at every school to guide planning for term 3, and safety walkthroughs at every school to test each element of our safety plans. Comparable work has gone on across the charter sector to prepare buildings and deeply engage communities, and the city has launched a $10 million reopening fund to support our charter schools. In addition, the district is providing regular on-site symptomatic and asymptomatic testing for students, teachers, and staff across all public schools. Lastly, we have made extraordinary collaborative efforts to vaccinate more than 7,000 teachers, staff, and leaders working in our childcare, public and independent schools since the end of January. This has included 2 dedicated partnerships with One Medical and Children's National, and reflects the mayor's commitment to prioritizing educators returning in person. We will continue working with our schools to identify teachers who want to resume in-person teaching, and will commit to getting teachers vaccinated as quickly as our supply of vaccine allows. During the response phase, we have also prioritized ensuring students have access to the resources they need to stay connected to their virtual programming, which means the reality for many of our families. To date, our efforts to support learning at home have included as many as 74,000 learning devices that were made available to public school students at the start of school, and as many as 63,400 students have received assistance getting access to the internet. Specifically, DCPS distributed over 32,000 devices, laptops and tablets, and 10,000 hotspots to every student who needs one. Mayor Bowser invested $3.3 million as part of the Internet for All initiative, led by our partners in Octo, to provide free internet access for up to 25,000 disconnected low-income students and families from DCPS and public charter schools. And DCPS and Octo established a multilingual family and student tech call center to support students with technology issues directly. Our response work is also focused on strengthening early childhood education, knowing that we must prevent our youngest learners from falling behind. The Bowser administration has taken many steps to stabilize the early childhood sector. These include distributing $5 million to locally funded emergency relief grants for childcare through the DC Child Care Relief Fund, which reached nearly all licensed providers. Providing $400,000 in access to quality emergency grants to support newly licensed or expanded providers to maintain the supply of infant and toddler care. Continuing to pay child care subsidy providers based on pre-pandemic enrollment through October of last year, and implementing a public health emergency subsidy rate in December of last year to increase payments to subsidy providers in recognition of the increased costs of delivering childcare during the public health emergency. As we move into the summer and toward our recovery phase, youth safety, well-being, and re-engagement will be foundational to our work. We will intensify our collective efforts to reconnect with chronically absent and disengaged students through a variety of summer experiences. We will plan ahead to make sure all students have the mental health supports they need, that safe passage to and from campus is in place, and that we are engaging in evidence-based work to proactively prevent youth violence. We will invest to continue and expand existing behavioral health supports for students and adults, including focus areas identified by LEAs, such as telehealth services, emergency response, curation of high-quality referrals and resources for school communities. Our academic acceleration recovery plan will also focus on extending time for learning through accelerator academies and expanded summer school programming, establishing innovative partnerships to infuse student programming with academic and social emotional support, including DPR summer camps, expanded Earn and Learn summer school programs through the Marion Barry Summer Youth Employment Program with schools as host sites, our out of school time summer programs, and expanded library services, and providing individualized attention to the students who need it most. This will include launching high dosage tutoring for students who will meet weekly with qualified tutors in small groups. We currently have summer programming available to serve more than 23,000 youth citywide and are adding more seats through expanded offerings with individual LEAs and nonprofit partners each week. Recovery will continue into the new school year, grounded in schools, which are already planning to provide extensive re-engagement, additional time, intensive tutoring, rearranged schedules, and after-school recreation. This includes an expansive partnership with City Bridge Education, which is launching a citywide tutoring core in partnership with my office and others, and providing expertise to LEAs and CBOs who want to set up high-intensity tutoring models for their students. The work will begin in early March with design sprints to pilot tutoring in more than a dozen schools. Lessons learned from these sprints will be invaluable to creating effective tutoring models for the summer and upcoming school year. I also want to note, as you may recall from our last hearing, the Bowser administration has taken advantage of 2 levels of federal funding to support our recovery efforts. Federal legislation authorized by the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, or ESSER, through the CARES Act in March 2020. Federal funds were appropriated to ESSER on 2 separate occasions, for ESSER 1 in March 2020, and for ESSER 2 through the Omnibus and COVID Relief and Response Act in December of 2020. OSSI applied and received approximately $42 million from ESSER 1 and about $172 million from ESSER 2. Schools already have their ESSER 1 funds, and OSSI has announced preliminary allocations of ESSER 2 funds, with 90% of the total award, or about $155 million, to flow directly to LEAs. These critical funds have not only enabled us to prepare school facilities for reopening, but will be a significant part of our recovery as we invest in learning acceleration, mental health supports, and other essential programs. Finally, for our Reimagine phase, which will follow in years to come, we are exploring opportunities to bring the lessons learned from the pandemic into the new way we serve our students and families. This will involve a continuation of innovative virtual learning platforms, greater flexibility for teachers and students in their coursework, schedule, and delivery model, and school communities co-creating programs that best meet the unique needs of their particular school campus. These are not challenges that we will solve quickly or easily overcome, but through these evidence-based, data-driven strategies and by working collaboratively with partners across our city and with the communities we serve, we can heal and recover together. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today, and I, along with my colleagues here, are very happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Kine. Members will note that before Deputy Mayor Kine testified, I called on members for opening statements. Councilmember Cheh apparently is recessing another hearing to give a statement, and that was a mix-up in timing. So Councilmember Cheh, if you want to give your statement now.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much. As everyone knows, and as we've indicated before, the children in the district are facing these unprecedented levels of learning loss and emotional and social ill effects from the pandemic. And so with that in mind, as you know, we called a hearing, this committee had a hearing about 2 weeks ago about learning loss. And I assume others have already made reference to this. We were all very disappointed in what we didn't hear and what we had hoped to hear about what the plans would be. Now, I was pleasantly surprised last Thursday when the mayor announced her plans for substantial investments in schools and student services. And those investments obviously are a foundation for recovery plans, but what we need is details and the missing pieces, timing, and that sort of thing. I'll have to go over the deputy mayor's testimony to see what is filled out. But among the things that we're looking to find out is about exactly when these recovery plans will be developed and finalized, who's going to participate in them, who's eligible for the summer term, all students or who? Will it be in person or virtual? Will we have tailored services and supports that students might need? And when will that be identified? How will the investments in laid out in the mayor's February 18th presentation be allocated? And when will we see the details on that? And then what learning recovery plans do we have already teed up for term 4? And again, Deputy Mayor, you might have spoken to this. I'm sorry, I'm running between these two hearings. As you know, the council, I had talked about emergency legislation to try to provoke what we're looking for. And I assume that now this will be coming forward. I'm very hopeful. There was also a thought about, and maybe Councilmember Allen has already spoken to this, about asking for a waiver on park. And we understand that, the Department of Education will have the final word on this, but and that OSSI may have already applied for this, but we certainly want to see that done. And if we're forced to go forward, and I know Chancellor, you had spoken to me about this on another day, that we can have a truncated or shortened exam, and that in any event, the teachers have been assured that their evaluations won't be dependent upon that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my colleagues for tolerating me getting in on this list where I am. And I'm going to have my staff follow up on listening to the rest of the testimony, because I'm chairing this other committee. But I hope that all of the things that the council and our parents and our teachers have been asking in terms of specifics and timing will be coming forth through the rest of the testimony today. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Cheh. Now, ordinarily, when we get to the witnesses, I don't call on any members who are late arrivals for opening statements. This is a little awkward since I had to go back and ask Councilmember Cheh, and I see that Councilmember Lewis George has joined us.
Yes, I am with Councilmember. I'm with Chairperson Cheh over in DDOT. Obviously, transportation.
She's left you already.
I know. She gave us a 15-minute break, so we're all like running in between. But
well, go for it for 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate it. I just wanted to come over to be able to say, we still don't know, as a ward council member, we still really don't know what to tell many parents who reach out to us asking about the city's plans for addressing learning loss. Here in Ward 4, we get substantial emails every day with parents asking questions regarding what the plans are. What I am hopeful we will hear today are more specifics on how we plan to use federal stimulus funds provided to help overcome what we've seen happen during the pandemic. So far, we don't know how much, but initial budgets right now for DCPS provide an amount which apparently can't be used on staff. And I'm not sure why they cannot be used on staff, and likely will go towards summer school. We've heard in other hearings, oversight hearings at from Department of Behavioral Health and our other human services organizations, that behavioral health is something we're going to have to take seriously because it's a part of recovering learning loss. And so we have to have the amount of staffing needed. And many of our schools don't have the staffing necessary when it comes to being able to support behavioral health in school and being able to support trauma. We've also heard that vaccines are not a part of the proposed plan for returning to school, or is not a factor. I'm not sure how vaccines cannot be a factor in returning to school. Our teachers' safety and their ability to feel comfortable to want to return have to be based on the vaccine rollout, and has to be something that is a part of that plan. We've also heard a lot, even from our charter sector, about how they have been able to do outdoor learning. We've heard, the administration say we support outdoor learning, but we haven't seen how that outdoor learning is being actually supported. We know for a fact from what we've heard at the last learning loss hearing that there's going to have to be intense tutoring. So that means intense tutoring in small class sizes means we would actually have to use funds or more staffing, because that would mean we would have smaller classes, and smaller class sizes mean we need more staff, and we would need more supports as far as out of time school programs or in-school support programs that are part of schools, which would involve needing more personnel and more funding for that. And so, for me, I hope that when the questions we'll hear from today is how the reopen plans include a vaccination plan for our teachers and our childcare centers in both sectors. I hope that a plan includes how we are now using what we've learned from outdoor learning as a way to actually have and implement that in those in schools, how we are going to use more people to be able to do the intense tutoring and small classes that we're going to have. And that is going to be a part of the plan, and how we're going to use our other agencies, how we're going to use DPR, how we're going to use our DBH and our human services agencies to address the trauma that has come with the pandemic. I'm going to go back over to DDOT because the other chairperson, Cheh, is getting me back over, but I thank you for this opportunity and I look forward to working with you all. Thanks so much, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember. So we will have a 10-minute round of questions for members. And I think there's enough time, although we will go past 6 o'clock for a 5-minute round following that. Deputy Mayor Kine, what is the status of the district's citywide plan for combating the learning loss? Are the last 2 pages of your testimony the district's plan, or is that the highlights of a more comprehensive plan?
Thanks, Chairman. I really appreciate the question. I would say those are highlights of a more comprehensive plan. I mean, obviously, we've been engaged in deep planning for recovery for months, and I'm very happy to share more details about our 3-phase plan to accelerate learning and to get our city back on track. I think it's important to think about this in those 3 stages that I laid out, all of which are important. The response phase currently, our recovery phase, which we're kicking off over to the summer, and then our 3rd reimagine phase. And I want to reemphasize what I said in my testimony, that what we're doing now in schools is our most important recovery work. And I recognize the extreme importance and look forward to talking about our summer plans and our plans for next year. But I just wanted to emphasize that all the work we're doing right now to mitigate learning loss proactively is where we're putting a lot of our energy on ensuring that our city does not fall too far behind. But I'm happy to share additional details about each of the phases if you're interested, sir.
Well, I think we are. I don't know that I want to use up my 10 minutes with you sharing right now. Is that something you can provide us with?
I'm certainly happy to provide additional details under each of the 3 phases, yes.
All right, please. For example, just in terms of questions I have, so there's talk about summer school, but do we even have a registration date for summer school? And do we have a registration date for summer school yet?
We have a very good idea of when that's going to be, and I'm happy to share that. And there were a number of comments in the opening testimonies, which I very much appreciated, around timing and certainly when families will know, because we appreciate the anxiety. Many of us feel it ourselves. And I can share that there are a number of important activities taking place over the summer that will engage students in learning loss recovery. The Marion Barry Summer Youth Employment Program, which is actually going to host a number of sites at schools where students can engage in credit recovery and learning, will happen this summer. That site registration for that is open now, and we have just extended the deadline for students to March 6th. So that will allow more students to register and get access to what's going to happen at their school locations. DPR is going to be hosting its usual summer camp program, and we will have a separate set of camps that will embed academic acceleration. The DPR registration, despite what I think is on the website, and I thank the councilmember for pointing that out, is going to open on March 22nd. So DPR summer camp registration will be March 22nd, and additional details about their offerings will appear on their website on March 8th. For DCPS, the chancellor can speak to this, but we know that they will make their new central offerings, which are extremely robust and innovative way of tackling learning loss for about 7,000 students. Those will be made available in early April, along with individualized plans for each of the school communities, and that will all be made available in early April.
Chancellor, do you want to expand on any of that, but please, within a minute?
Yes, certainly. So as the deputy mayor described, We will provide families details on our centralized summer programming next week, and registration for those programming will begin the first week of April. That includes all of the typical programming we provide for extended year for our students receiving special education services, our language learners, also middle school acceleration opportunities, credit recovery for high school. We'll also have seats for K-8 literacy and enrichment. And then we're also adding programming for early childhood education this summer as well. And again, these are all of our centralized programs. And then schools are in their planning process for the school-based acceleration programming that will take place over the summer. And again, families can register for that the first week of April as well.
Dr. Walker Davis, can you speak for the charter sector?
Thank you, Chairman. What I would say is similarly, charter LEAs are in the process of planning for their summer. And I want to point out that several of our charter LEAs already have robust summer programming extending into the year. What they are looking at right now is how that will adjust according to their reopening plans for yet this semester and where they might want to change acceleration efforts or emphasize certain strategies in the summer programming. And many of those sites are also going to be thinking about how they apply for the use of the summer youth employment efforts that that the deputy mayor just described.
So I'm being mindful of the clock and pushing along here. I think that was my first question in 6 minutes. Deputy Mayor Kine, what stakeholder engagement have you or the other entities, OSSE, DCPS, Public Charter School Board, done to inform the planning?
We have engaged in quite extensive stakeholder engagement throughout the pandemic. We began last spring with lots of conversations and engagement with teachers and families and parents, and that included students. We had focus groups that ran through the spring and into the summer. We did a comprehensive citywide survey to understand what needs were, and we have continued that work through the fall and up to the current point. Certainly every single LEA, and the Chancellor will be happy to speak to this, has engaged deeply with their local communities. And I think DCPS, for example, has done an extraordinary job with their reopening core, which actually engaged teachers and families in developing school-specific plans for term 3, which caused, by the way, many schools to look different from each other, but did allow school communities to figure out their exact plans based on student needs. Of course, the charter sector, I've talked to many charter leaders who have done similar things. They've spent a lot of time with their families. They say their families are surveyed out and talked out in some instances. And all of their planning work has been done in collaboration with their teacher partners. I am starting now a round of recovery conversations across the city as well, starting with the ward councils and other stakeholder groups to make sure that we continue to be open to listening to, hearing, getting ideas and reactions from local communities as we consider our recovery efforts over the next couple of years.
I should note that the Committee of the Whole staff has begun a series of meetings with different stakeholder groups. I attended the first meeting last night, and this is not a question, it's just a statement or conveying an observation that there just seemed to be a disconnect between those stakeholders, and I think they were representatives from different schools in wards 2, 3, and 6, I believe. Seemed to be a disconnection in terms of their being engaged, being consulted, hearing. So you may feel that there's a lot of engagement going on, but these were stakeholders who didn't feel that there was any engagement going on. I'm going to move to my other question. We've heard from some of the more successful high dosage tutoring providers in the district that they have struggled at times to get students and families to participate and engage this school year. We also saw participation become an issue when DCPS tried to do extended time previously. What are you doing to ensure that students and parents, especially those students who need it the most, buy in and are willing to participate in any of the strategies that you have identified? Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, we are, that is such an important question, Chairman, and thank you for asking it. We have been very focused based on our own learning from last summer when we did provide some tutoring to families and students that was not well taken up. We have been very focused on a strategy which allows us to go where we know students will be. That led us to the deep partnerships with Parks and Recreation, and that led us to our deep partnership with the Summer Youth Employment Program, and that led us to our deep partnerships with Out of School Time and the libraries. These are all cherished institutions, if I can use that language, across the city, and we know students go to those programs and love them. And that's why we're choosing over the summer to spend a lot of energy trying to embed our academic work, our credit recovery, our tutoring, and our acceleration work into those programs specifically. I'll say one other very brief comment on this, which is in my conversations with LEAs, including charter LEAs and with the chancellor, it's very clear that the summer programming they're imagining is not the usual summer programming, meaning you come to school and you go home. They're very, very focused on recreation. One of the largest charter LEAs, for example, is planning on splitting their summer days basically in half and providing acceleration in the morning, but in the afternoon doing lots of recreation and camp-like activity. And so I think that all of the education leaders in the city fully understand we've got to engage kids in new ways.
Thank you. And my time is up. Councilmember Allen for 10 minutes. Councilmember Allen, we apparently have this competing hearing. I'm going to go to Councilmember Henderson.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the DDOT hearing is also going on. I'm double devicing at this moment, following what's going on over there. Let me just start. Deputy Mayor Klein and Chancellor Fairby, those dates that you provided is really gonna I wish we could just put that out on a website just so people know this is coming and that you guys are planning for those things. And I appreciate you clarifying because the issue in terms of the DPR website. Chancellor Fairby, I just have some questions for you. So you said that DCPS, the first week of April, families will be able to sign up for options. I think that's what I heard, but I just want to make sure.
That is correct. So we will be sharing with families next week our centralized programming that takes place every year. And I gave a description of some of those earlier, which includes our programming for our students receiving special education services, language learners. We're adding early childhood education. We do K-8. Middle school acceleration, and then credit recovery and completion for the secondary students. We typically announce those options in March. So we're in a similar timeline as we are this year. However, given that we're adding an additional layer of acceleration that is school-based, we believe that the reopening community core approach was really successful with customizing supports and targeted supports for families and students. So we are using that same approach for our school-based efforts, which include small group tutoring through what we're calling our accelerator academies, and then high dose tutoring as well. And
so, sorry, because I only have a little bit of time,
sure.
But how will I know, if I'm a parent, how will I know which one my student qualifies for? Right? How will I know you're saying, oh, you're fit for Accelerator Academy versus summer school versus early childhood versus, whatever else?
Great question. So all of our schools utilize our MTSS system, which allows us to tier students in tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 services, tier 3 being the most intensive. There's regular communication with families on where they are in that continuum. So families will get direct communication from schools, which services are aligned to where students are in their academic and social emotional needs, and then provide those opportunities accordingly. And they'll have an opportunity to sign up in April. That's why we are having both sessions that are offered centrally and school-based registration at the same time, so families have the entire landscape. And it's also important to note that there will be social emotional activities as well. So part of the supplementary budget we gave to schools is to provide opportunities for students to socialize, participate in clubs, or potentially other extracurricular activities.
Okay. This is about to be a trick question that I know you can't answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Are these going to be in person or virtual?
Great question again. So they'll be blended. So we'll have in person. We'll have also some that will be remote. So two good examples: our extended year program for students that are receiving special education services. Some of that programming will be in person. Some of that high dose tutoring will be in person. However, we have some virtual options for literacy that will be remote. We have some options that will be remote for pre-K3, pre-K4. So there'll be a blend of both in-person and remote activities available to families.
Okay. Next kind of trick question, but it's not. It's actually fairly straightforward. Have you started talking to the WTU about this? Because if you're going to do summer school, accelerator academies, these other partnerships, you could bring a bunch of outside people in, but I imagine that you need your educators to say yes.
Yeah,
and I imagine that's also going to cost some money.
Yeah, so we provided a budget to schools, so they know what their allocation is to do their planning.
That's separate and apart from the school budgets that went out?
Correct. So schools receive their regular school budgets to plan for the 21-22 school year. Then they receive a supplemental allotment that is dedicated to academic acceleration.
Okay.
I think it's important to make that distinction because I believe one council member mentioned that, a school wanted to use the acceleration dollars for personnel, and it's intended to do that acceleration, either small group tutoring or 1-to-1 or 1-to-3 high dose.
But to Councilmember Lewis George's point, though, you're still going to have to pay people this summer. So where does that money come from?
You can pay people for tutoring, but we don't intend for schools to purchase positions for the school year. Because that one person, it would be difficult for that one or, or 2 or 3 people to do all of that tutoring for students themselves. So schools can use partners, or we're encouraging them to utilize staff. We obviously want to take advantage of the expertise and the relationship that the current teachers and staff in the school have with families.
Okay. This is kind of a combined question for both Dr. Walker Davis and Deputy Mayor Kine. I know that each charter LEA has their own situation and what they're doing, but how will we be able to guarantee to all families of public school students that you're going to have some type of option this summer? So for instance, the charter school A may still be working out their plan. DPR's registration opens on March 22nd, but I don't know my charter school plan, so I don't know if I should take a DPR slot or should wait for my school. And you see how we need some synergy here in terms of the timeline. And so I'm curious, what are the conversations you guys are having, recognizing, yes, it is your prerogative and autonomy to make those decisions, but I need you to help us move this train along together.
Yes, I'll be happy to begin, and Dr. Walker Davis, I'm sure we'll follow up. And I think it's a really, really great question. It's one of the reasons that I've been meeting with every single leader of every single charter LEA. Firstly, it was daily, then it was weekly, now it's bi-weekly, to try to ensure that we are actually all pushing together towards the same outcome. And I can tell you with great assurance that all of the charter LEA leaders that we engage with, which is all of them, are actively working on figuring out what they want to do because they care deeply about their students. Now, how do we ensure that we actually accelerate some of the decision making to get to a place where we know what they're going to be doing over the summer? And that we're doing in a couple ways. One, we're simply asking them quite regularly to do that. We're sharing the timing around DPR. There's signups that they've got to do in order to be part of that program. Same thing for Summer Youth Employment Program. And so there is synergy around those efforts. And secondly, as we have always done through OSSI, we are establishing these continuous improvement plans that all LEAs have to submit, including their recovery planning. So we will be able to look at every single LEA's plan for the summer and for next year, both in terms of their posture, how they're conducting their business, but also what recovery work they're doing. And we'll be able to assure ourselves that they do have plans.
Are those plans public, and do they go to OSSI? Or do they go to...
I will let the state superintendent talk about what we have done there.
Hold on. I have 2 minutes, and because I have to get to Director Lott over at DDOT.
Got it. So just repeat the questions. We'll try to answer them quickly.
Okay.
Are they public? I think the continuous improvement
is it
plans are
public?
public, yes.
Does it go to OSSI?
Yes.
Yes.
Is it on your
And the
website?
public
Or will
charter
it
school
be on
board.
your website? Okay, Dr. Walker Davis, how are you talking to them and saying, hey, you got to do something, and if you're not going to do something, let us know?
Sure. So I would echo everything that the deputy mayor said about the conversations that we're having with the LEA leaders to tell them about what's possible. Our role as the charter board is to continue to collect that information around what is your operating status, what are your plans for summer, what are your plans for the fall, and particularly around the continuous improvement plans, education plans in coordination with OSSI. The other piece that we're doing, I want to recognize, is our charter leaders understand the urgency of being able to plug into these opportunities.
Mhm.
And to the deputy mayor's point, they are actively working on the summer youth employment opportunities, whatever partnerships they can use with DPR. But to your earlier point, this is going to be a site-by-site conversation. What we can do is we have published the operating status on our website for families to be able to access that so they can see what their school is offering. We are encouraging schools to continue to have those conversations with their school communities. And we are expecting that by March and April, they will be able to communicate that because they are in active conversations about school reopening and the fall. So I believe that it's very similar timing to what the chancellor shared.
So in my last 20 seconds here, what I want to say too that is important is that you be upfront in terms of the capacity, right? Because I get emails daily from some DCPS parents who are like, but I want my kid in for term 4, but you don't have the capacity right now because of, you know, what the caps are. So if you only have 2 slots available, but you have 100 kids who are interested, you could see how that, excuse me, I'll have more questions in the second round, but thank you so much, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Henderson. Second,
Could I have a brief comment on the capacity point?
yes, Deputy Mayor.
Which is just to say, DCPS, I think, has been very clear. They've got capacity for 10% of their population for tutoring and 30% for their accelerator academies. And the charter schools are doing similar things. So for example, one of the largest LEAs is doubling its summer capacity so they can hit 50% of their students. So we have a very good sense that the capacity will be expanded this year. I think it's a very important point. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And as I was saying, the second round, we will have a second round, but it will be shorter than 10 minutes. Councilmember Robert White, do you have questions?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Deputy Mayor, Chancellor, and Superintendent. First, I want to get a clarity on some of the previous questions. Deputy Mayor, the Chairman asked how you informed your planning for learning loss. And you mentioned engagement starting in the spring and a citywide survey and the work that continued into the fall. Was this specific to learning loss, this engagement, these engagements?
Those engagements were specific to families' experience of virtual, and learning loss is always a part of that, which is how we understood early on that we would have to do a lot of work to mitigate it. So yes, it was, the conversations definitely incorporated, you know, how are you experiencing virtual? What's lacking for you? What are your challenges?
What was specific in this outreach to learning loss and recovery planning?
So you could imagine the kinds of questions that we would pose to families include things like, what are your challenges? Initially, there were a lot of technology challenges, which we knew immediately we had to overcome because the longer students didn't have access, the more learning loss they would experience. We also followed up on questions like, what's the engagement like? What should schools and the system be doing to help support the engagement efforts if your student is falling off track or not attending? So that incorporated good insights about how we could mitigate learning loss. And then, of course, as we look forward, we did a lot of work last summer standing up some tutoring. We did partnerships with DPR. You'll recall we had learning hubs, and we explored those things as ways in which we could prevent and mitigate learning loss. And got a lot of good feedback on those things as well.
So I am a DCPS family. I recall a survey that there's been nothing. It seems like there isn't any engagement with families on what to do about learning loss. So difficulties on virtual learning. There was some engagement on that, which I don't think was sufficient. It really seemed more like checking a box, and I got to be honest about this. But I'm not hearing any engagement on planning to account for learning loss. That is to say, I mean, you're talking about things that are going to happen over the summer, extended days, things that are going to affect families that they have to plan around, that they have to plan for. And what I'm trying to figure out specifically is how did you engage, the chairman's question, how was your learning loss plan informed by families?
So I'm going to let the Chancellor chime in a little bit on DCPS's engagement, given the comment you just made, Councilmember, and I'm sorry about your experience. But I will share with you that when we think about trying to recover as a city from the lost learning that's occurred, we clearly need to pay attention to what our schools and LEAs are telling us about what they know is happening on the ground with their young people. And that has deeply informed all of the plans that we're describing here.
But no, that informed distance learning and moving back to in-person learning. And so I guess I'm asking, what's distinct between how we're going to address learning loss and how we're doing education right now? What's the difference between those two?
So I would say, I think of that as sort of like a Venn diagram, if I can use that expression. In order for us to do our best work mitigating learning loss, we have to ensure that what we're delivering right now is of very high quality, while at the same time we're planning for our recovery, which I shared we're kickstarting over the summer through this series of plans. I would like to invite the Chancellor to share a little bit about how DCPS is engaging families in the work on recovery, because I think it's important, Councilmember, and it feels like that'll be a good answer to the question you're driving at.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor, for giving the opportunity to speak to your question, Councilmember White, about our engagement. So DCPS hosted a number of listening sessions, which were focus group opportunities for families to give us insight of how we can support students this school year throughout the summer and going into the 21-22 school year. We've also utilized our parent university as an ongoing resource as well to support families. We've seen very robust engagement through our parent universities on a number of topics that parents have asked support for. But specifically for our recovery efforts over the summer and going into next school year, we are applying the same approach that we did for reopening, and that is each school established a core planning team to advise and support the principal in developing plans for the school, which will include staff members, community members, and oftentimes has included students as well in helping craft those plans. In addition to that, we host regular monthly meetings with my parent advisory, teacher advisory, and student advisory groups that provide much feedback and information about their current experiences and ideas and thoughts for our path forward. So we'll continue to rely on these groups and other means of gathering feedback from families, but I believe the approach of reopening through the reopening community core team was really helpful in customizing the reopening plans for schools, and we will expect to see that same fruitful outcomes in our summer and fall acceleration efforts.
All right, so engagement for planning for learning loss and recovery has not been different than engagement for distance learning. And
there've been two separate processes. So we had an engagement period where we solely focused on the reopening plan. Schools are now in that second phase of re-engagement on their acceleration plan. And those plans will be custom to that school based on their student population.
When will the schools be finished with that?
They'll be finished with those engagement opportunities at the end of March, and then that's when we will announce their school-specific plans in early April.
I thought Deputy Mayor said earlier that something was being announced next week, that programming was being announced.
Our centralized programs, so the programs that we typically offer each summer, from the central service team that coordinates those services, we are prepared to announce those offerings, and we'll announce those next week. But the school-specific offerings will be announced again the end of March, and registration will begin early April.
So DCPS parents should expect to be engaged by their individual school?
Correct.
Okay. I want to, what is an Accelerator Academy?
Thank you for asking that question. So our Accelerator Academy are geared toward students where we call our tier 2 students. So these are students who need support, but they don't necessarily need the most intensive support, which would be 1-to-1 or 1-to-2, 1-to-3 high dose tutoring. So this is small group academic support, which will include tutoring over 2 to 3 weeks on a focus area where students have common gaps in learning or opportunities for support. We could focus on a group for early literacy. It could be a math group. It just depends on the school and the needs of that particular population.
And what age groups are these, the Accelerator Academy and the other offerings? What age groups are those?
Yeah, so it is not specific to an age group. So this can occur as early as our ECE students in pre-K3, pre-K4, all the way up into the high school and our secondary students.
Okay. I think it was in response to Councilmember Henderson's question. She asked how will families know which of the programs they're eligible for? The response is that students are tiered and they know what tiers they're in.
Right. So once the schools craft their plans that are school specific, they will communicate directly to families which services or which opportunity are targeted for their particular child and how to register for that particular opportunity.
Okay, so the school will articulate to each family, these are your options, not these are the options overall, and you may or may not qualify for some of them, but they will articulate to each family which option or options they qualify for.
Correct. There'll be a clear delineation between these are the options for all students.
Mm-hmm.
And based on the targeted efforts for that school, these are specific opportunities that are aligned to your child's needs.
Okay. And how long will, so Accelerate Academy, 3 weeks, is all the programming roughly 3 weeks over
it would depend on the needs of the student population at the school, the types of skills that they're working on. So it will vary, very similar to our reopening plans and the flexibility and the differences between each school plan. However, the universal programming that is centralized will begin in July 6th and it will run into August. And that's typically about a month of services for students.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember White. Councilmember Cheh White for questions.
Yes, thank you. I want to start off with Deputy Mayor Khan. You talked about a commitment to innovative online curriculum. What, if anything, has been created or done differently since learning the loss due to online learning was observed?
I think that all the schools, DCPS and the charter schools, have taken a very, very strong continuous learning approach to their online curriculum. So for example, I know the Chancellor has shared and can say more about this. DCPS spent the summer revising all of its coursework and all of its curriculum to make it more appropriate for online learning. And then I can share with you also that across the city, over the course of this school year, there's been a lot of learning about what it takes to provide good online learning, which relate to things like who's doing the talking, what's the cognitive load, does it sit with the student or with the teacher? And schools have made adjustments over the course of this year to continuously improve their online learning.
Let me ask you this. Have there been any conversations with DCPS and or DC Public Charter about dispatching counselors and or social workers in the community to address students' needs or concerns?
If you're talking about home visits by school-based staff, the answer is yes, there are schools that are doing that. I know the Department of Behavioral Health, which provides school clinicians, initially allowed their clinicians to make a determination about whether it was safe to do that or not. So they were in some instances in the community, and in other instances, as you I'm sure well know, Councilmember, were engaged in the kind of health or telemedicine posture
Yeah.
can provide stuff online. So there have been home visits. It has not been consistent across all schools.
Okay. Who collects the data as relates to how many visits and effectiveness and evaluating?
So each LEA is responsible for ensuring that its behavioral health programming is effective and is meeting the needs of its students. So each LEA will know if it conducted home visits or not. And then Department of Behavioral Health certainly tracks the efficacy of its overall program that it runs across the public schools.
All right. I know you all select City Bridge Education as a partner. What went into selecting them, and what stuck out for them to be selected?
So I think that rather than thinking of it as a selection process, Councilmember, I would say that City Bridge was an organization, one of many that we were talking to initially, that expressed a strong interest in both aggregating philanthropic dollars across a number of philanthropies and bringing a certain amount of expertise to bear on tutoring and high dosage tutoring. And so we were very enthusiastic about the idea that they could bring capacity to the city that we didn't have.
Are you saying their partnership brought philanthropic dollars, or what are you communicating as far as philanthropy?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So they themselves are committing money to this effort, and they have also gotten other philanthropies to commit funding to provide tutors and tutoring.
All right. Let me ask you this, Ms. Walker Davis, real quick. Did each of your LEAs have to submit a plan to the Public Charter School Board?
Thank you, Councilmember White. If your question is around their reopening or recovery plans, each
Yes.
of the charter LEAs have to submit a continuous education plan to OSSI, which we also review those plans. And so we use the continuous education plan submitted formally to OSSI as the plan for how they are going to both do distance learning and how they will, when those are issued again for the fall, how they'll return in the fall.
All right. What is the time frame for that plan, and have you gotten any yet?
So the schools that are operating now are operating with the continuous improvement plan that they submitted for this school year. I will let the interim superintendent talk about when those will be updated for the fall, but they are currently operating with the continuous plans that they submitted for this school year.
Got it, Ms. Young.
Thank you. The continuous education plans for the upcoming school year, the template along with guiding principles indicating where we think schools and LEAs need to be focused on most will be released this spring in, I believe in April, and they will be due closer to the beginning of June, but we will be collecting summer plans earlier than that. So the continuous education plans as a whole will be focused on having common and public information about what the school's upcoming plans are for directing their academics, as well as both the physical and mental socio-emotional health of their school buildings and communities for the fall in June.
Thank you. Let me ask you this while we have OSSI. So once they submit that plan, does OSSI give recommendations or guidance to fit maybe some greater agendas or some type of theory or guidelines that they have to abide by?
Yes, actually, we will be publishing an update of our continuous education guiding principles, which we published earlier last year in advance of the previous plans, focused on recovery, specifically on the areas that we want LEAs and schools to be focused on. And that includes accelerating unfinished learning in many capacities, both in the traditional school day through the academics and assessments that happen there, as well as through additional learning that we've all talked about today in the many potential forms that could come at the school level, as well as the safe physical reopening of buildings and supporting students' socio-emotional and mental health of the students, adults, and communities that schools serve. And there will be other types of specific assurances and requirements related to certain student populations, such as English language learners or students with disabilities. And we will have updated guiding principles which set a bar for where we want schools and LEAs to be aiming there, as well as we will provide feedback and technical assistance before those plans are approved from both us and the Charter School Board.
Thank you. Dr. Farabee, Do you know how many teachers have been vaccinated already?
Yes, so we had approximately 3,000 of our staff and partners to be vaccinated as a part of our mass vaccination effort in collaboration with DC Health, Children's National Hospital. Really proud of that partnership. We're able to complete that at Dunbar High School.
And, and what percentage of the teachers are vaccinated to date already?
So we primarily focus on staff and partners that were working in person. That total count was approximately 6,000. So we made the opportunity available to those individuals, and about half of those individuals decided to make an appointment and to participate in the vaccination process. Since then, people that are working in person can continue to schedule their vaccine through One Medical, and those vaccination registrations occur every Monday.
And it's to my understanding that some of the teachers opted out of the vaccination? Or
So it was not mandatory. If you were working in person, it was not required. So it was a choice of the person that was working in person, whether they participated or not.
I think one of my colleagues talked about this, but I don't remember the actual question that relates to the Washington Teachers Union. You all in ongoing discussions with the Washington Teachers Union, how the rollout is going to be? And if so, what are the challenges that are you facing, if any?
Yeah, I think we are in regular conversations with the Washington Teacher Union, all our labor leaders that are really helpful. We decided to transition to a bi-weekly labor leader structure where we meet bi-weekly to discuss how we're progressing in our reopening plans, any concerns that they may have that need to be addressed. I believe that this has been, again, really helpful in troubleshooting any issues. And then most recently, we've talked a lot about our budget plans and a hotline that we've created where any member of the DCPS community, a partner, can report any concerns they may have as it relates to our in-person operations.
Thank you. Real quick, are we having extended school year through the summer all the way around?
No, so we're having our traditional summer school programming, which will begin in July, and then schools will be offering additional programming as well throughout the summer.
And I have a little bit seconds left. Brief, can you explain how the accelerated academies will work in brief, if you can sum it up?
Sure. So I want to go back and when you talk about an extended school year, there was an extended school year that was school-based, and then there's extended school year for students receiving special education services. So just a point of clarification, that extended school year will continue as it has in the past. The academic acceleration academies are intended to be small group tutoring sessions. The numbers could be anywhere from like say 7 to 10. Students will be cohorted together for targeted support where there are learning gaps.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Cheh and White. I believe the Councilmember Bonds, Cheh, and Lewis George are not present at the moment. I'm calling their names in case I see their faces pop up. I saw Vince Gray get on, but I don't see him. So I'm going to go to Councilmember Pinto for 10 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much for everybody being here and the continued answers and efforts. You know, it's pretty remarkable that in 2 weeks we'll hit the year mark for most of our students learning from home all year. And so I want to first start with a couple questions around the internet access issues. And Deputy Mayor Kine, you mentioned the Internet for All initiative, which is aimed to provide free internet access for up to 25,000 disconnected low-income families in the district. Do you know how many families are currently taking advantage of this program?
I think the last report that I had on that, Councilmember, was that it was something like 6,000 families, touching about 9,000 public school students. But I can happily confirm that and get you the most up-to-date number.
Okay. And if the goal is to reach 25,000 families, where do you think the disconnect is in reaching as many families as the program is aimed to?
Thanks. It's actually a very good question, and it requires us to delve a little bit into the weeds of the rollout because we partner with Comcast and RCN. And what this requires is that we basically have updated student register information from schools because the eligibility requirements are for those families who qualify for TANF or SNAP. So we've got to have accurate school lists that come up through OSSI. They then have to be contacted. They have to opt in. There's got to be an understanding by the family on what the terms of the program is. And so there's quite a lot of back and forth, and we've been working very hard with our LEA colleagues to ensure that all the right information goes out so families are really able to take advantage of this.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, I know that me and all my colleagues would be happy to help amplify those messages to get the information into as many hands as possible.
Thank you.
Do you know what the average wait time is for the tech call center?
I think you might be referring to the DCPS Tech Call Center, so I'll refer that question to the Chancellor.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. So we continue to monitor our tech support. We have not seen wait time numbers most recently as we've added additional capacity. And we also, it's important to know, offer extended time periods as well, where family members or students can request additional tech assistance. And then schools also offer tech support in their buildings. So oftentimes students or parents bring a device to school if there is an update to be made or any type of troubleshooting needs to occur with the device in the hardware.
Okay. Okay, and Deputy Mayor Kine, just going back to what we were just talking about, if a family is unsure if they do qualify, I agree that the goal would be to have updated information for who qualifies and all the SNAP and TANF beneficiaries, but can a family reach out to OSSI if they are unsure if they do qualify for the Internet for All initiative?
It's a good question, and I actually don't know the answer to that question. I'm not sure if the interim superintendent does know the answer, and if not, we'll get an answer to your office, council member.
In general, OSSI has not been the agency to receive inquiries related to eligibility specifically, but again, we'll be happy to provide a more clear follow-up path about how a family could do that.
Okay, thank you so much.
And just to put a fine point in that, Octo has really been the lead partner and has been doing a really wonderful job working with the LEAs. So we'll be sure to get that information to you.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you. So why are families only eligible for childcare subsidies if they are working or in school? Because, you know, of course, this excludes many of our families who may be chronically unemployed, which may be in the biggest need category. I'll pose that to Deputy Mayor Kine, but if you want to.
Actually, I was waiting for the interim superintendent who runs the subsidy program to provide the details on that.
We know I want to get back to you with a more detailed answer, but we actually know in terms of subsidy eligibility, there are eligibility provisions that allow someone who is unemployed and searching for work to be eligible. So I don't want to overstate on some of the specifics of the legalities there, but we know that for families who are unemployed and meet some standards of searching for work, that they do retain their eligibility. We've extended eligibility and not required the same level of documentation for renewal. We've extended renewals for subsidy eligibility throughout the pandemic. So I'd be happy to provide more information on that, and also information on where families can call if they're interested in subsidy eligibility for newly eligible families.
Okay, thank you. I'd appreciate that. Also, Superintendent Young, OSSI announced that they're canceling park testing and told parents that we plan on requiring schools to submit information to OSSI about student progress based on school level assessments and invest in citywide research to understand the state of unfinished learning across the state. Can you elaborate on this instruction and explain what kind of citywide research that you plan to conduct?
Yeah, thank you for asking this question. I think this was a very challenging decision to come to, but we feel it is in the best it best serves our community to suspend, to apply to a waiver from the U.S. Department of Education to suspend the summative assessment in English and math this year. We know from speaking to this council and other bodies how much we value having common, transparent, actionable information about how our students are learning. And of course, that assessment is the gold standard for how to do that. However, in this year when it's not really practicable to do that, we would like to look at other ways that schools at the school level collect learning information. It will not mean the same thing, but it will be the best we can do to have information about where our students are. So different schools and LEAs administer different kinds of benchmark or formative assessments. And we would like to continue to hold LEAs responsible as they are doing now for both implementing those and reporting back to the best manner possible in what way their students are meeting the expected targets or expectations for learning. Those assessments don't give us exactly the same information. They're not given in a common way across, but it'll give us some information about where our schools identify how their students are doing at the school level. Similarly, we had researchers here at the previous roundtable talking about types of collections that they have done with very granular or opt-in data from different LEAs who, for example, give a similar kind of assessment to be able to provide that student level data and calculate proxy measures for how different groups of students across the city are progressing, or to extrapolate that data in ways to help us get an idea of what that could be. I think we're also really excited that we've begun to establish that partnership of the Research Practice Partnership, which the council and the executive collaborated on its establishment some time ago. And we're eager to begin to work with them and with the advisory board it will establish to think about what ways recovery learning in the longer term should be observed, both quantitatively and qualitatively.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Chancellor Farabee, I'm excited about the prospect of additional high dosage tutoring. That seems like it could be really effective to address learning loss. How will the students be selected to engage in this program as we move forward?
Thank you for that question. We have a MTSS system, which is our system for monitoring student progress throughout the year. We use a number of indicators, include teacher assessments, other district-wide formative assessment that we use to assess student mastery. We then compile that data into this database to make the decision about where there are gaps in learning. And then if there are significant or common gaps for students that need to be addressed, those students would then be assigned to our high dose tutoring groups. And again, it could be by grade level, it could be by skill. It just depends on the student population at a school.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, speed round, last question, Deputy Mayor Kine. We had oversight with DPR this week, and I asked them about at-risk preferences for summer camps. And they said that there was an at-risk for kids in wards 7 and 8, but that they hadn't really developed in conjunction with OSSI a full at-risk preference. So is this something that you are all thinking about, that you'd be open to?
We are thinking about it. And the other way that we're thinking about it, Councilmember, and thanks for the question because it matters a great deal to us. We're also thinking about the idea of geographic preferences. So depending on where we set up the camps, we want to make sure we set them up in communities that we think will really benefit from them. So both the regular summer camps, of course, but also the camps that will embed the accelerated learning. So we have other ways of trying to ensure that students that really need the camps and the recreation and the accelerated learning will have access even without an at-risk preference, which we are continuing to explore.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it. Thank you, Chairman.
And if I may just say, my team informs me that any family that is unsure of their eligibility can reach out to their school, because the schools keep the eligibility list, and that way they can find out if they are eligible and also make sure their name's there if they are. So it really is the school as the point of contact for the family.
Thank you very much. We will be sure to share that.
Sorry about that. I'm communicating with other members on this roundtable. I see that Councilmember Lewis George has reappeared. Do you have questions?
Yes, Chairman, thank you. I wanted to ask about federal funding and what the plans are regarding federal funding, both to OSSI and the Chancellor regarding how federal funds are planned on being used. I earlier this week heard that that schools were not allowed to use them for any personnel reasons. And I wanted to see if there was an explanation, the federal government requiring that, or is that something we have decided to do as a district?
I can provide a quick overview and then I'll share with the Chancellor to explain the specifics of DCPS. So for the federal funding is allowed to be used on personnel and on a variety of other things, including facilities. But it can be used for personnel in multiple different ways. It can be used to hire permanent staff, even though the funding is term limited, so it is not renewable. It can also be used to provide supplemental staff, for example, for tutoring programs or individual types of instructional needs over summer or throughout the year. So the ability to use that funding is broad and can be used to meet LEA's different needs. And the extent of the federal funding can be used to expend for the next 2 fiscal years. Chancellor, I think I defer to you on the specifics of how DCPS is using that funding in its plans.
Thank you, Superintendent, and thank you again for the question, council members. So there are several streams of federal funding. There's the traditional Title I federal funding and other title dollars that are baked into our DCPS budget that is allocated to schools and to central services teams. However, it's important to note we did receive supplemental ESSER funding that we utilized to purchase technology and devices for students and also to support access to high-speed internet. That was in our first round of ESSER funding. We also received a second round of ESSER funding, which is approximately $80 million. And that $80 million is allocated to primarily academic acceleration and social emotional supports that schools can offer to families throughout the summer and next school year. And then $27 million of that is dedicated to technology. Again, more devices for student and tech support, software, and then educator devices. And then we allocate $10 million for critical supports, such as food service, curriculum and special education supports, and then also athletics. And then $9 million is set aside for innovation, and a part of that $9 million can be used to invest in outdoor learning or outdoor learning structures. So that is how we are allocating our federal dollars. To put a final point on your question about staff, supplemental staff, as the superintendent described, can be purchased with the supplemental ESSER funding. However, permanent staff is discouraged because of the funding cliff reference, and also we know we need multiple staff members and partners to accomplish the academic acceleration tutoring or high-dose tutoring that we're asking schools to execute on.
Okay.
Councilmember, if I could just, if you don't mind, just jump in for 20 seconds on the federal funding. It's important to also recognize and acknowledge that there are central funds that are allocated by the state. So there's money, a small amount of money is held back by OSSI that we use to look for gaps across the whole system. And we consider things like school safety and health, certainly the mental health and well-being that we're talking about, and other kinds of supports for schools that we can actually fund centrally.
Awesome. And I appreciate that. I know right now when I was in the DBH hearing, there were no DBH clinicians at any of our opportunity academies. So those are our most vulnerable students, right? You're talking Roosevelt's Day, Ballou's Day, Luke C. Moore. So are we saying that there's a possibility for us to get clinicians at these opportunity academies, especially since they're our most vulnerable student, they're likely to be the most impacted for learning loss. And so they can have the supports that they need within their schools?
Yeah, one of the very important things we're looking at, and thank you so much for the question, is how do we expand access to mental health services? And we think DBH does a wonderful job. So we're looking at different ways we might get more clinicians in schools. And certainly we would look at the opportunity academies as a place that we could do that.
And so in that vein, how did each school's stimulus amount, did everyone get the same stimulus amount? How were school stimulus amounts determined? And what does that look like?
We'll let the state superintendent answer that question on the federal funding.
So on the federal funding, the way it was distributed from the federal government through the district, it was distributed at the LEA level, and each local education agency, DCPS and charters, got an amount based on a calculation related to their Title I population, which is similar to at-risk. It's an economic need. And so that's how the amounts were distributed from federal down to LEA. And then each LEA can make those decisions related to if and how they spend those at the central or school level.
Okay. Want to get a sense, a Ward 4 teacher emailed me saying his school's funding for extended day was cut in their initial budget for next school year. And so why are we cutting funding for extended day, particularly at Title I schools? The teacher wrote, we specifically utilized the extra hour to provide educational interventions and acceleration. That is to say, we met students where they were with equity in mind. And so is it correct that we cut some schools' extended day funds? And if so, why?
Councilmember, do you know if it was a DCPS teacher?
Yes, it was a DCPS teacher.
Thank you. The chancellor will answer.
I can respond to that. So DCPS phased out the extended day model. We've done that over time. Only a few schools had the extended day model. And we have repurposed those dollars to our acceleration efforts. And to your question about allocation to schools for acceleration, we utilize a formula looking at the level, knowing that our elementary age students have struggled more than our secondary students, and then also the at-risk population at that school to determine their allocation for their acceleration funds.
Okay, that's helpful. And I know, Aussie, you answered already the stimulus amount question. So am I assuming that, Chancellor Fairby, that you all did the same as far as stimulus for each school? You just use the guidelines given by Aussie to determine the stimulus amount for each DC public school?
Just to quickly clarify, there's no guidelines for how an LEA, such as DCPS or a charter, needs to distribute it once they receive it to a school, because there may be centralized needs or different ways that they address that. So there's no requirement from the state or federal level.
Okay. And so based on that, the questions for the chancellor is how did DCPS then as an LEA determine how they were going to distribute their funds?
Yeah, so to be clear, the allocation formula structure that I just referenced is how we determine. So once we got those funds from OSSI, we then allocate those dollars to schools based on their at-risk population and the level. So for example, there are more weights for elementary school in our formula, and then the more at-risk students you have, the more funding you receive. Now there is a floor, so we have a minimum amount of $50,000 because we do want schools to provide social emotional supports as well. So there may be schools that don't have a large population of at-risk students, but if your population of at-risk students is significant, you would receive more funding. So for example, we got schools with over $500,000 in their acceleration funds that they can use towards the efforts that we're asking schools to implement over the summer and going into next school year.
Okay, thank you for that. And then there's been all this conversation on extended day, and a lot of back and forth. So why did DCPS choose to end extended day, and what sort of data informed that decision?
Yeah, so the current model that we're utilizing with the academic acceleration funds allows us to be more targeted in our through these targeted efforts. It also allows us to maximize our multi-tier support system that I mentioned earlier, the NTSS system, which gives us very specific data on student needs and the types of supports that they would need. And then schools can begin to build programming around that. We believe that is the best way to boost academic performance in lieu of a general program for extended day, which we have not seen strong outcomes from as a whole across the district.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I believe my time is out. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Lewis George. I think we will start with round two. I have a few questions. I'm going to go over the restrictions on the federal funding. At one point it was said federal funds cannot be used on staff. My sense of that is that we can't use federal dollars to hire new FTEs because the federal money will run out, and what do we do with the FTEs? But federal funds could be used on existing staff, for instance, for longer days or for the double dose tutoring and so forth. I see the chancellor nodding his head. Do I have this right?
You have it right.
I would provide one clarification, which is that there is
Sure.
not a federal prohibition on using this funding to pay for current staff. But the conditions under which you would do that, one might consider, I know LEAs and their finance managers would be careful about that because this funding is not going to be there forever. And so it is possible to use that funding to pay for existing staff if for some reason there were financial reasons to do so. But the conditions under which our schools are considering that do have to do with the term limitation of the funding.
Okay. Thank you for that. At the mayor's situational briefing on February 18th, it was laid out that there would be $15 million in teacher growth, recruitment and retention, $27 million in student and educator technology, $33 million in student learning acceleration and social emotional supports, $3 million in new school programs, $9 million to initiate learning innovations such as outdoor learning. That totals $87 million. Plus, I believe this is plus, $15 million to stabilize school budgets, $9 million continued investment in cluster support model, $10 million sustained core services for students, schools, and families. That's $34 million, for a total of $121 million. Am I to assume that this is where the federal relief money is going, or that this is going to be paid for with federal relief money? Is this a combination of the federal relief money plus local funds, or is it all local funds?
Yeah, what you just described is a blend of both local funds, federal grants, and the relief funds. So it is a blend of several sources. So for example, DCPS received a grant to support teachers and teacher incentives and recruitment and retention efforts. That is baked in there. Our local funds baked there, and then the $80 million in our ESSA 2 funding is also baked into those initiatives as well.
And so if I look at these bubbles and boxes on this page, the $33 million in student learning acceleration and social emotional supports is probably, of the items, the one that correlates most closely with what this hearing's about, which is overcoming learning loss.
Yes, those funds for the $33 million for learning acceleration and social emotional supports are coming directly from our ESSA 2 funding. And
that's is it part or entirely the recovery effort?
It is just part. As the deputy mayor mentioned earlier, this is a phased approach. It will also require us to tackle this over multi-years. And again, this is the beginning of recovery. And then we will also then phase into our reimagining phase, where we'll have more engagement with students and families about how we not only come back to the status quo, but better than the status quo.
Okay, thank you for that. So earlier, Deputy Mayor Kine answered a question from one of the members about mental health support, and some in person, some telehealth. And the way the question was answered led me to think and raise the question here. Shouldn't we, while we want schools to be customizing how they're approaching their students, don't we also want some consistency across the sectors, for instance, that we want to be encouraging more in-person social emotional support, just as a for instance. So my question is about consistency, because I got a sense that this was a little bit too ad hoc.
Thanks, Chairman. I'll start, and I think it's a really, it's an excellent question, and one thing that we've grappled with throughout the pandemic, which is how do we ensure that schools and LEAs are delivering consistently high quality services based on their own abilities to do so and the needs as they've determined them of their communities. And as you know, we've got a very robust set of excellent schools and school people who are really hard at work on all of this. I think in the instance of mental health, one thing that is fair to say that I think we're really proud of is the consistency that is now provided by DBH on the clinicians in schools and the supervisory work that they do with those clinicians. So it was through them that we learned of this variation that was occurring, where some schools had home visits occurring and some didn't. And what they've done now, and the superintendent can speak a little bit more about this, is they have stood up a community of practice. They have regular meetings among all of the clinicians. They convene them. They are rolling out good practices, first in the instance of telemedicine, but also how they can begin to re-engage on a community basis. So we are hard at work now in driving the kind of consistency that you're talking about, because I do think it's important that we're sharing what works well and that more and more schools do that.
I can chime in briefly from the OSSE perspective as well. I think it's important that schools are able to respond to their specific community's needs, but also that we invest in things that are common across, as the deputy mayor suggested. So Project Aware is a project that OSSE and DBH and others have, and a number of LEAs have been invested in over some time to build up the capacity and responsiveness of behavioral health services in schools. OSSE has also invested in youth mental health first aid training, as the deputy mayor mentioned, school behavioral health community of practice, specific kinds of technical assistance, office hours, and we do intend to spend some of our centralized funding investing in certain kinds of behavioral health supports that are going to be the most maximized at a centralized citywide, statewide level, including some educator wellness, both from OSSE and DBH. Investments are in our adults who are also going through a lot right now. Certain kinds of suicide prevention education for teachers and certain kinds of crisis team expansion that makes sense from a citywide investment that all LEAs and schools should be able to access. So we want to make sure that those foundational supports are available for everyone, and then also our schools can tailor their needs to their communities.
Thank you. And I'm over my time. Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Chairman Mendelson. Chancellor Fairby, I just want to I want to clear something up before we get ourselves in trouble here. Okay, I asked you about a separate budget for summer. You said DCPS schools were given a separate budget for summer versus school year 21-22. Will the schools have an opportunity to decide how that funding is spent, or is that something that's just in central office?
For the dollars that are allocated to schools for their acceleration efforts for the summer and next school year, they have the choice of how they execute on those dollars. We do give them some guardrails, so there's certain expectations that we provide.
Okay.
And we've given them some guidance on how to plan that, and they're now working with their school communities on their plans.
Okay, because I said that on the Twitters and I got responses that said, that's news to me. So let me just ask for clarification. I pulled up Brookland Middle School's school budget initial allocation. There is a little paragraph that says, new, Brookland will also receive additional stimulus funds in the approximate amount of $178,098 to provide supplemental services to accelerate learning recovery. Is this what you're talking about? Is this their summer money?
Correct. That is, yes, that allocation that you just referenced is dollars that they can use over the summer or in next school.
Okay, so when do the conversations happen with LSATs and school communities about that money?
Right, so that happens in March. So schools—
But we haven't gotten there yet.
Yes. So we wanted schools first to focus on their budget for next school year, for the 21-22 school year, because we need their budget petitions back so we can respond to those petitions.
Okay.
Simultaneously, they're going through this phase in March on their development of their plans for those dollars. And then schools will submit their plans for those dollars on March 26th.
Okay, so can you guys just perhaps just clarify to the school communities, because they're saying, oh no, you told us you're giving us this money, but that we can't touch it. And I don't think they understand that the purpose for that money is for planning in March about what to do for accelerated learning in the summer.
Yeah, we'll continue to give schools guidance on that and make that clear for the public. We will also continue to have information on our Reopen Strong website. We gave additional guidance to schools this week, and we'll continue to support them accordingly. But thank you for making that point of clarification.
Because I just wanted to clear that up because people were coming at me and I was like, but I asked the chancellor. Okay, second thing I want to talk about is SYEP. Deputy Mayor, you said in your testimony, we want to expand Earn and Learn summer school programs through the Marionberry Summer Youth Program with schools as host sites. My concern, I just want to make sure that we are not co-opting the whole SYEP program. Whereas we have students, like when I talked to some high school students a couple of weeks ago, they were like, I need a job this summer. And I don't want my job to be virtual. I want to actually go somewhere, be told I have to show up at whatever particular time and actually do work. Now I understand those pieces, but I don't want to disappoint these kids where they get their SYEP assignment and it's to show up to school for half the day. Because then they're gonna be like, wait, what happened here? That's not a job. School is not supposed to be, I mean, it's, it's my job when I'm under the age of 18, but you know what I'm saying? So how are we making this distinction here between how the SYEP dollars are going to be spent or in this program is going to be used? Because those applications close next week.
Yeah, Councilmember, thanks for the question. I think it's a really, really important one because obviously kids have different needs and different desires for what they do over the summer, and some want to work, and some are going to be happy to go and do some credit recovery or accelerated learning and then complement that with some work-based experience. So we're not co-opting Summer Youth Employment Program for summer school. What we're saying is that there will be a number of school sites and school locations where those schools can work with their own students, and those students will still have to opt into that. Like they're not going to get assigned to a school, for their programming if they don't want it. In other words, the school will develop a program, and in theory, the students will be extremely excited about it because it'll allow them to catch up on some work that they need to catch up on, and it will give them some work-based learning opportunity as well. So that's our goal, and we will see how large a component of the Summer Youth Employment Program that is. It won't be the majority of it, certainly. I will also share with you something that's important part of your question, which is right now, we are planning that the Summer Youth Employment Program is going to be virtual as it was last summer. And we are carefully watching to see how much of it we can turn on in person. Because our goal would be to do as much in person as we could. But right now we've had to assume, because of the health conditions and following our guidance from DC Health, that it will look a lot like it did last summer. So right now we are planning for virtual, but we are carefully monitoring to make sure we can turn it on as we're able to. So students like the ones you described will get the in-person, job experience.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to underscore that the communication and transparency piece is key here. I think we've gotten a lot of information out in these last 2 hours. And so I hope that we can keep this up over the next few months. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope that wasn't a plug for continuing this hearing tonight for 2 months continuous.
No.
I didn't think so. Councilmember Robert White, and you will be followed by Councilmember Treon White if I see him.
Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor, what are the specific goals for learning recovery?
We are establishing different goals for different populations of students over slightly different time horizons. We are very carefully trying to match those goals to what we have included in our ESSER state plan for the federal government, because we're accountable for those goals based on the money that we're getting. But roughly speaking, and the superintendent will keep me honest here, we're talking about returning to our pre-pandemic levels of achievement within a year or two, and then exceeding those in the subsequent year. But the way that we think about this is we've got our grades 3 through 8 that are tested on PARC. So we've got some PARC goals associated with those. And then of course, there are our youngest learners that we're very concerned about. And we're ensuring that they are on a trajectory to exceed their pre-pandemic levels, again, within a year or two.
So what should the public and the council expect if you don't meet those goals? Will you change plans? Will you say, well, it's going to take longer than we thought, but we're not going to change plan? What should we expect?
Well, I think it's a really excellent question because we are, we hold ourselves accountable to fairly high standards on this, and I should say very high standards on this. And of course, OSSI has oversight over the school system and holds the schools to standards on their performance. And the Public Charter School Board, as the authorizer of the charter sector, specifically focuses on their own performance. So one can expect action across the system if schools and LEAs are not achieving the goals that we have set and they have set for themselves in terms of this recovery trajectory. And that includes things like some consequences in terms of funding. If it's extreme, there are direct interventions that we sometimes deploy. But certainly at this point, we're all about ensuring in the first instance that the interventions are evidence-based. So just as we heard from the experts in the last hearing, we have talked to all of them as well. We are providing guidance to LEAs on the kinds of things that we know will work. So we're trying to ensure that that happens in the first instance. And then as schools don't meet the goals that we've set, we'll continue to work with them to help improve the interventions.
Thank you. What will DCPS and DC Public Charter Schools do for makeup sessions for semesters for students who failed semester 1 or semester 2?
We are also talking about credit recovery as a critically important part of our overall offering for the summer and the next school year. I've talked a little bit about the Summer Youth Employment Program as a place we can do that. The Chancellor can talk about some of the expanded credit recovery opportunities that DCPS will be providing. And then Dr. Walker-Davis will know something of the credit recovery in the charter sector, which is extensive.
And I don't want to go too far down the wrong path. I'm essentially wondering, will students have to decide between credit recovery and other learning loss tools, or will those be combined somehow?
Well, to be clear, credit recovery has started now. So where we know that students are not succeeding in their course or they didn't experience success in term 1, term 2, we're giving opportunities for students to cover that ground throughout their school year. There will be additional opportunities over the summer as well. But it's important to note that credit recovery is an ongoing effort for those students that may have not experienced success in a course.
I would echo the Chancellor's sentiments there and just say that, of course, each LEA has its own policies around making up courses, but in the conversations I've had with LEA leaders, they have all been focused on how do we make sure that students are making up for any lost learning while continuing to accelerate their learning. So they're not talking about remediation, but continuing to keep students on a path of grade level and academic success while using these opportunities like summer and recovery efforts in the fall to make sure that they're making up for that learning. So I just want to I can't speak to every single plan that every single charter is having, but the sentiment is, no, they will not have to make decisions around recovery versus acceleration, that the leaders are making efforts to do programming that keeps them on a track of upward movement.
Thank you. And then the final seconds, can you tell me for DCPS and the charter schools what the current enrollment is for in-person learning and what the current capacity is?
Yes, so for DCPS, we're almost at 10,000 and our current capacity is approximately 13,600. That will shift from time to time based on staffing. And our projected capacity for term 3 was 15,000.
And for our charter schools, we're currently around 4,000 students that are in person right now. And by the end of March, that will be closer to 10,000. The capacity issue is a little bit more challenging in terms of the overall sector, because that is really on a site-by-site basis in terms of the facility constraints to meet the health protocols. But at this point, we are looking at roughly 22% of our students being back in person by March 31st.
Thank you. Thank you for your indulgence, Chairman.
Thank you. I noticed how you kind of slipped right past the chime. I was not paying attention. I do not see Councilmember Cheh on White. I do not see Councilmember Bonds, who texted me that she was joining. She was at another hearing or meeting. I do not see Councilmember Cheh. I do not see Councilmember Lewis George. Councilmember Pinto.
Really just the bottom of the totem pole here for you tonight.
No, you're at the top.
All right, so to pick up where we were last discussing, Chancellor Farabee, about the high dosage tutoring, you were talking about that it's really determined based on need. And so if there's a school that has students, many students with a need for high dosage tutoring versus a school that doesn't have students with that need, will the first have a prioritization for more students than necessarily just a couple each school?
Yeah, so the budget for acceleration efforts, including small group tutoring and the high dose tutoring, is based on the projected number of students that will need to be served on that campus. So the larger your at-risk population, the larger your budget. And then also we identify a need to provide additional dollars for elementary schools, given more challenges were realized for our elementary age students over the health emergency. So there is slightly more dollars allocated to our elementary schools compared to our secondary schools. However, our secondary schools have more students. So our secondary schools often have the larger budgets for acceleration efforts.
Okay, thank you very much. And Deputy Mayor Kine, we were talking about the summer camps, and you said that you were also considering geographic locations. In certain areas where there may be additional challenges for access to park space or safety concerns, is there a consideration for transporting students to a different space? How are you thinking through those issues?
We typically do not provide specific transportation for the camps, but the Kids Ride Free program does work over the summer. And so that's the investment that we continue to make as a city with the support of council to ensure our kids can actually get where they need to go for school and their recreation activities. So that's how we think about transportation.
Okay. And if camps are located in high need areas, would that mean that those camps are also would be limited to kids who live in those areas as well?
Well, there are a couple of ways that we do it. And historically, Department of Parks and Rec has run some extension camps, for example, in Wards 7 and 8. Often those have been based in schools in Wards 7 and 8. And we do have the ability to have eligibility preference go to students who live in the neighborhoods. We can also, and this is one thing we're exploring this year, have eligibility preference go to students who attend those schools. So it can be neighborhood based or it could be school based, at least in the first instance of those who want to get in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. That's helpful information. So also to Deputy Mayor Kine, you mentioned that in the recovery phase, you're going to be intensifying your collective efforts to reconnect with students who've been chronically absent or disengaged through a variety of summer experiences. And so I'm curious if you know how many students at this moment fall into that category, and how will you be intensifying these efforts moving forward?
Yeah, we have a fairly good sense based on the attendance that we're collecting across both the charter sector and DCPS about those students that are disengaged or are disengaging. They have low attendance. And we've done a few things to address that this year that actually have proved successful that we plan to continue. So we've worked with CFSA, who've been really terrific partners to stand up expanded capacity to check in on students in advance of the kind of 10-day referral, like required referral window. So after students have been missing for 5 days, the LEAs have been referring them to CFSA, to this outreach desk, if you want to think of it in that way. And in that way, they've been making contact with families to just understand what's the cause of the students' non-attendance, and they've been reporting that back to the schools so the schools can take action. In addition, individual schools have gone to extraordinary lengths to re-engage students. There's a charter LEA, for example, that has been standing up a program to use social media and contact with friends to just try and track down students that are missing. Another charter LEA leader was sharing with me that they are doing home visits. So we're looking at ways to provide that information broadly across the sectors, those kinds of good practices, but we also want to expand that capacity that's been sitting at CFSA to do that outreach to students that are have been chronically absent. There are lots of other things that we're planning on doing, including something the superintendent mentioned, which is the potential use of our federal dollars to stand up crisis intervention points for students that are chronically absent or disengaged. But we probably don't have time to get into the full list now.
Well, thank you so much. That's right. I am over time, so I won't say in my last couple seconds. Thank you very much to you all. Really appreciate all the big effort here. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember. Because we're moving along fairly quickly and there'll be another round. Actually, I see that Councilmember Lewis George has just appeared for 5 minutes.
Thank you. This musical chairs between DDOT is wonderful. I wanted to get some clarity on some of the vaccination point. Opportunities for teachers currently teaching virtually to get vaccinated so they feel comfortable returning. Are you all planning to do another mass vaccination site like you did at Dunbar?
Councilmember, I'll take the first crack at answering your very good and important question on teacher vaccinations. The way that we're thinking about this now, of course, is that all teachers and staff that are working in person at schools are eligible to be vaccinated. We're looking at expanding that eligibility. And at the same time, logistically, DC Health is figuring out what's the easiest, most convenient way to do that as we expand eligibility for educators along with others in the city. So it's not clear at this moment that we'll do another big vaccination site as we did before, as we consider the expanded eligibility.
Okay. I'm just going to ask if that would be something that that you all will reconsider and move from there. Can I get a sense of the percentage of the COVID consent forms that have been returned? And is there a different form for asymptomatic and symptomatic testing?
You mean specific to the DCPS
Yeah.
program? Okay, the Chancellor will take that one. Chancellor, you're unfortunately muted.
Can you hear me now? Thank you. So there are different forms for the asymptomatic testing and compared to the symptomatic testing, and I would have to get back to you the various numbers for each of those across the district. I don't have those with me now.
Okay. And the other, wanting to know some sort of the funding for our students with disabilities. I know many families in the past have talked about those students who have certain IEPs and just the reality for them to be able to have to receive their fair appropriate public education. Is there a way, are you all looking at ways of funding to give either, are you prioritizing those students to be in person or are you thinking about providing extra funding for those students' families to be able to meet the needs of students with disabilities that may, don't have the ability to be in person, or it's really unsafe for them and they need home aids? Are you looking at alternatives to providing funding for them and in staff for the staff to be able to go to their homes and be able to serve those students? And that question can go for Ossie or Chancellor therapy.
I can take the, Chancellor, if you'd like to go first, otherwise I can jump in.
Yeah, I can just specifically say we do prioritize our students with IEPs for our in-person programming that we had this year. And we've also done that as we ask schools to think about their planning over the summer. And then we do have the extended year for select students based on their individualized education plan to receive either in-person services or remote services. We work really hard to provide the least restrictive environment for students, whether they're remote or at home, and try to ensure that many of their related service providers are able to serve them either in person or at home.
Okay. And Aussie, have you all been given any, I guess, states? I know it's probably, as states are also at the same time, no one expected a pandemic, so providing a FAPE to a student and what that looks like. Have you all gotten any guidance from the federal level on how to ensure we're providing students a FAPE during a pandemic, specifically those students with disabilities?
Yes, thank you for that question. And I think, as the Chancellor noted, it is really important to prioritize our students with disabilities. The federal government has been clear from the very beginning of the pandemic that the rights and of every student with an IEP are maintained throughout the pandemic, as are their right to their full services and instruction. There is a recognition that is much harder for both students and families and schools during this time. And so the expectation is that schools and families work together to do their very best to get students everything they need, and to sometimes make amendments to their individualized education plans if those services need to be changed in any way, and to continue to provide recovery supports and prioritize those supports through recovery. So what we see in terms of prioritizing either in-person services or just provision of services in a way that is most effective for the family is what we want to be seeing. And we will be continuing to provide guidance to our LEAs to that effect. And my team has also been providing technical assistance and monitoring to schools to see, to make sure that schools are providing, updated individualized education plans, et cetera, and provide one-on-one assistance if they need support in how to creatively think about that.
Okay. I can just imagine that that's something that's just evolving. And so I know it's going to be hard for LEAs, DCPS, and charter with this developing. And I can't imagine what that's like for Aussie having to kind of to delve into this area. But we have to learn and go with students with disabilities because of their needs and making sure we have it. So I appreciate that and the work that you're doing to make that happen.
Thank you, Councilmember. As I indicated, there'll be one more round, 5-minute round for members who are present. So let me ask a few questions. I want to come back to vaccinations, which Councilmember Lewis George just brought up. There seem to be some teachers who are hesitant. Maybe I shouldn't just say teachers, but adults in the schools who are hesitant about getting vaccinated. What percentage are vaccinated at this point? And is that cross-sector, or can you give it by sector? Deputy Mayor? If you
we know right now there are about 9,000 educators who have been vaccinated. That includes DCPS, charter schools, independent schools, and our child care facilities.
And what's the universe? What's the total number?
The universe is much higher than that.
Okay, so we're not at 60 or 70%. And even if we were, I would be concerned that we would want a higher percentage than that. So how are we going to get there? What are the strategies for convincing individuals who are hesitant to vaccinate?
So in the first instance, Chairman, I want to thank you for asking the question. I have to state in the first instance that we really need more vaccines. The primary strategy has got to be for us to continue to advocate to get more vaccine, because the challenge we're facing on vaccinating educators is the challenge we're facing across the city, which is we simply don't have enough. We don't have enough vaccines. I think in terms of convincing and reassuring and helping educators and staff understand that it's safe, OSSI has really led the charge with panel discussions, regular technical assistance programs for schools. We've brought the head of Children's National pediatrics division to talk about it. We've had people on from childcare centers and schools that have already been vaccinated to share their own experiences. So I do think that it's important that we reassure communities that it is safe to be vaccinated. And I'm not sure if the superintendent wants to add anything or if you'd like her to, but I think those are other strategies we're using.
If the superintendent wants to, but be mindful of the clock.
Nothing specifically further to add, but we are working with other external resources to match schools with individual speakers as well. You know, sometimes in smaller groups and smaller communities, one-on-one conversations are very helpful. And we also see patterns in which when some group of educators or folks who are eligible get vaccinated and come back and report back to their peers, then we see a second wave of people interested. We continue to emphasize that when teachers and educators and anyone has a chance, they should get the vaccine when they are eligible. But we do see that one-on-one connection and reporting back from people who are known to you is an effective way of decreasing hesitancy.
Well, I think this is an important question, and I'll be coming back to it in future hearings. When do the LEAs have to report to OSSI what or how they are planning to or using their ESSER II funds?
The ESSER II is the second round of funding that we are providing the sort of like paper receipt for that funding to LEAs next week for the specifics so that they can begin to do their financial planning. We are putting out an application for that funding aligned to the plans that we discussed, because first we want to, establish what the guiding principles are, have LEAs make their plans and report on how they're using those funding in relation to the plans that we are holding people accountable for. So that the deadline for those budgets will be in June. However, the LEAs will be able to use those funds after they receive them back towards earlier in the year. So they will be able to apply those funds to expenditures prior. So they can use, so we anticipate to have public update on how LEAs budget those funds in June.
So then how does the executive plan a comprehensive strategy if it doesn't know how the LEAs are going to use their funds until June? Can you require earlier?
I think that part of our planning is in the process of what we anticipate schools to be doing in the next year. And that plan that we are soliciting, including the guiding principles and the plans for what is happening, should be thoughtful and be provided to us. And the funding is how people will use what funds they use to expend it on. We know that, for example, our schools, as the chancellor discussed, are making plans for those budgets right now, but they need to triangulate federal and local sources, et cetera. So this in June will be the accounting of how they're using that federal funding in addition to those other local funds towards those goals. Some of the things I think we'll be able to learn from that are which schools or how LEAs are spending funds in one area or another. Are LEAs spending more on infrastructure and facilities or on technology or on behavioral mental health supports? We know that they will be doing all those things, but we will then also know in what way they were spending their federal money in that way.
So you're saying that even though we won't get the report on what they plan to do with the federal money until June, you will already know what they're planning to do earlier?
We're soliciting concurrent plans on what their plans are for the upcoming year in terms of the prioritizing for unfinished learning.
And when will you get those concurrent plans?
For the upcoming school year will be in June, and for the summer prior to that.
For the summer, when will you be getting those?
I don't have a specific date for you. We're coordinating right now with the Deputy Mayor's office, but we anticipate significantly earlier than June.
I might be missing something, but that just seems a little problematic to me in terms of planning now for the fall, planning now for the summer, to not have those plans from the individual LEAs until June.
Chairman, if I could offer an observation, I think what we're trying to convey is, first of all, we agree with you 100% on the importance of fully understanding what schools are doing and how they're planning on expending the money and what their recovery plans will be. And ensuring that they comport with best practice and evidence base, which is why we're putting guardrails on the funding allocations that go out. And I think what the superintendent is sharing is, for the summer, we anticipate having copies of what those plans are on a school by school basis for summer recovery, as we've now got from DCPS, sometime early this spring. We don't have the exact date yet because we haven't figured it out logistically. For the following school year, we'll have the continuous improvement plans that we discussed by June. But in each case, we know schools will make their own plans based on the money they know they have coming in. So they've got their ESSER allocations, they know what they have to spend, their plans will be based on that. And then the accounting of that money is an accounting that happens after the fact.
And if I could just clarify, Chairman, we are currently reaching out to our charter LEAs about their programming for reopening for yet this school year, plans for the summer, and typically around this time, they start submitting to the charter school board what they were planning to do for the summer. So we have access to information on planning for summer right now, in addition to all of the other pieces that the superintendent and the deputy mayor shared.
I'm a couple minutes over my time, so I'm going to go to Councilmember White. But I do have some concern on this. Councilmember White?
Thank you very much. There's money, as you noted, Deputy Mayor, earmarked for outdoor learning. Will the schools get that money when it comes available?
Thank you for the question. And I also want to just say that I share your interest in outdoor learning as a very, very important option for schools that want to take advantage of it. The Chancellor can talk about how DCPS is thinking about that allocation. I want to share that centrally, in terms of our ESSER resources that we'll have access to through OSSI, we're also considering whether we might be able to provide some technical assistance and support on that as the weather gets better and as we continue to try to meet the important guidance from DC Health. But let me ask the Chancellor, if you don't mind just sharing the direct answer to the council member's question for DCPS.
Yeah, for DCPS, Councilmember White, we are preparing a list of items that schools can procure. We've done the homework on the types of structures that would be most suitable for outdoor spaces, and we will be providing schools ability to request those resources as they build their plans for the spring and into the summer.
Okay, so the schools will be able to request funding to purchase the outdoor learning resources?
Correct.
Okay. And the $16 million for devices, how many eligible students currently don't have devices?
So for DCPS, any student who has requested a device has received a device. And as mentioned earlier, we've distributed over 30,000 devices. We've made available devices for our earliest learners and then also K through 12. We also, it's important to note that if there are multiple students within a household, we wanted to also ensure that each student that wanted a device has a device or needs a device.
That's what I thought. So what will this $16 million be used for?
So we are allocating additional dollars. So we have $27 million as a part of our tech investments, which includes funding for our one-to-one initiative. So every student in grades 3 through 12 would have his or her own device. And then for our early childhood education to second grade, they would have a ratio of 3 to 1. This also allows us to refresh teacher devices. So our educators who have devices outside of our life cycle can receive devices. Also allows us to build out our tech support and also purchase software as well needed to expand learning.
Okay, and who does the tech support, DCPS or Octo?
Octo does the tech support.
Okay. And the Deputy Mayor, in your testimony, you mentioned that you currently have summer programming available to serve 23,000 youth citywide. What does that mean? What programming is available for 23,000 youth?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Council Member. Right now, we're just trying to name the programs that we are already starting to roll out. So that means 10,000 in summer youth employment program. We have 1,500 seats in the out of school time programming, the grants for which we're just awarding. We've got 4,600 seats in the DPR camps that we are starting to do now. And we're trying to identify ways to expand that. And then we've included in that the DCPS 7,000 seats that they're allocating centrally that are distinct from the school-based offerings that they're going to have. So that doesn't include the DCPS and charter school-specific offerings that will dramatically expand those numbers.
Okay. And for the tutoring, who will be the tutors be? Are those all going to be selected by City Bridge or vetted, trained?
Thanks for the question. It's actually a very, very important question because clearly in order to be successful, we basically need a multitude of really talented, caring, well-trained people. We're very lucky in DC, as you know, Councilmember, through your many conversations, to have a bunch of partners that are very, very good at doing that work. So Literacy Lab would be one. City Year is another who we've spoken to. And there are several others. And so it is our idea that will work to expand the capacity of those organizations. And in addition, we're identifying within the LEAs, schools themselves will be paying their own teachers stipends. But of course, teachers need a break and they've got to rest and recover themselves. So we're hoping that additional capacity will come from those partners. We've also identified other sources that the City Tutor Corps will help us to train. And those include sources from some of the other national partners in tutoring, and also people like folks on our college campuses. So we've got a number of different sources to meet what we think will be a fairly substantial need.
Well, I want to thank each of you for being here. And again, Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Lewis George, did you want another round of questions?
Yes, and I promise I'm going to try to go quick. I know it's been going on for a while. I wanted to, for a second, go to Dr. Davis, Dr. Walker Davis, and how are charter schools utilizing their federal funds and PPP funds? Are they being determined by each individual LEA charter, or is there guidance being given by the charter school board on how to utilize that funding?
Thank you for the question, Council Member. Yes, each LEA has the ability to make their own determinations on the use of those funds based on the guidance provided by OSSI. So we do not have guidance out to schools regarding the federal funds, but I would say that the conversations that we've had around themes for recovery and areas to consider are those that come up in our best practice sharing and the conversations that we've had with LEAs, but we do not have authority over the use of those federal funds. They do, in their reporting back to us around their budgets, share their funding for both federal and local funds, but they are following the guidance put out by OSSI.
Okay. And when you say share, you mean like to you all, that's not something public?
Well, we have a financial report that we do publicly, but the individual line items of their budget is not something that we publicly publish.
Okay.
It will be through OSSI's plan.
Okay.
I will add that the expenditures for all federal funds will be public based on both local and federal reporting requirements. The budgets are also, what is planned, but the expenditures also will be public based on a number of categories.
Perfect. And another question, Ms. Davis, I know DC Public Schools have been posting case notification letters for schools, but we don't know if there have been any positive cases in charter schools. Have there been any times where charter schools had to close in order to comply with OSSI and DC health guidelines? And is that something that do you all have a process similar to DC Public Schools regarding notification letters for schools?
So the charter schools are required to follow the health and safety guidelines, and they have protocols for how they're supposed to make those notifications. It is our understanding that they are following those notifications. We also deploy health consultants to support schools in how they manage those communications. We do have a notification protocol for general notices to your community. And so, yes, there are policies that we have about how LEA reports to us communication to their school community, but it is not specific to COVID testing or positive cases.
Okay. And in regards to your teachers particularly and getting vaccinated, do you all have an idea of the percentage of charter school teachers who have been vaccinated either through the Dunbar site or through other means of being able to get tested?
Sure. So similar to what the deputy mayor shared, we had a list of eligible charter educators, staff in buildings that were open for in-person. That list was somewhere around 3,000. And the last reporting that I had was roughly around 1,200 educators and charters had accessed the vaccine. That was prior to the portal being open to multiple categories of educators. And so I do not have a current number as to the specific charter folks who have accessed the vaccine other than the 9,000 that the deputy mayor shared, which is all educators who are eligible in that phase.
Okay. And I know a number of schools, charter schools are opening, having a greater, and I probably missed this while I was at the DDOT hearing, capacity starting on Monday. What does that look like as far as charter schools go? And if you would like to be specific to Ward 4, that would be great as well, as far as the charter schools who are coming back majority in person in that percentage.
Thank you, Councilmember. I may have to get back to you on the list specific to Ward 4, but I can say as of the end of this month, we have roughly 4,000 students who are back in person. And by the end of March, that number will be closer to over 9,000. And so roughly 20 some odd % of our charter population will be back in some form of in-person by March 31st. But we can get you specific details on the school's reopening efforts in Ward 4.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I know my time is almost up. Sorry, went on mute at the wrong time. Wrong time. While I was making my last point, wanted to get a sense.
Your time is up, so
okay.
10 seconds.
My last point was for utilizing, and it's just for utilizing during the summer. I will say 18 to 22-year-olds are really great. What we know from my time at City Year, I know is that that's a group that's really has an impact when it comes to high-level tutoring. If we could use our summer youth employment program, which does have 18 to 22-year-olds, and get them trained, I believe that they would be a good group to come in, especially because many of them are from DC, have a connection to the students, and those things are factors in being good, being great tutors. If we could consider utilizing our summer youth employment, 18 to 22-year-olds for summer learning to be able to address some of the issues that we've had before. Thank you all for being here and the work that you're doing for our students. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Councilmember, if I could just very briefly say, I think it's a wonderful idea in part because we did that last year. To a certain degree, and we're planning on continuing that work this year, and we'll look to expanding it because I think you're absolutely right. We've got capacity for young people to be trained as tutors that we could use in these ways. And then secondly, we've been talking to City Year, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, about what it might take to help support them expanding their capacity because they're getting lots of requests from schools, from new schools who want to engage with them.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Henderson, did you want to, whoever's present has been getting a third round, so you are now present if you want a third round.
Thank you, Chairman Mendelson. I do want to touch on one thing. I had the opportunity maybe earlier this week, it might have been last week, I think it was earlier this week. I went to Berea Public Charter School to see their outdoor learning. My days are running together. So I actually wanted to ask Chancellor Fairby, you know, the Berea kids were out there in the snow, and, you know, and they were playing and in class, like it was no difference. And I know that for some folks in DCPS, perhaps they weren't necessarily thinking of it in that environment, but they definitely wanted to consider outdoor learning for the spring. And I know that this might be a way for us to be able to expand the number of students who are able to attend for term 4 if we utilize the outdoor space. And so I'm curious, what is the communication to the schools in terms of the availability of funds to be able to really put this program into place? Because, you know, you're getting the emails, I'm getting the emails of parents clamoring for an opportunity for in-person instruction for term 4. And we know that for some buildings, we have some capacity issues, but outdoor learning might be a way for us to be able to expand on that.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Henderson. You're right. There are varied levels of capacity across the city. And to help prepare for term 4, we've given schools guidance on how they could expand in-person learning for term 4, where we can maintain the continuity of the learning experience and not be disruptive to those students who, you know, value their relationships with their teacher. We don't want to create a disruption in term 4. But where there are opportunities to expand, we believe that one way could be outdoor learning. And as I mentioned earlier, we are currently creating a number of options for schools to purchase from that would support outdoor structures, heaters, a number of different options that would help advance that. We also are working with schools on potentially bringing some teachers back that may be interested in returning to term 4. Again, this would be only schools that are at capacity and there's current demand that exceeds their current capacity. So we're giving schools guidance on that now. They'll be working on those plans over the coming weeks. And we'll anticipate having more information to share with families in March and April as we approach term 4 on April 19th.
Okay, so term 4 begins on April 19th. That was going to be mine.
Yep, term 4 begins on April 19th after spring break.
Okay, so just to clarify something that you said, is outdoor learning only available to schools that are currently at capacity?
No, you asked for term 4. So specifically for term 4.
Right, for term 4, that's what I'm saying. For term 4.
Yeah, so we're particularly focused on those schools that are at capacity and there is more demand than capacity. For those schools that are at capacity, they're welcome to use their outdoor spaces. However, that is not our focus at this time in terms of procuring items or trying to procure items for the spring. Now, for the summer and next school year, we certainly can provide a broader stroke if there's interest in outdoor structures.
Okay, well, you and I both know that in some parts of the city, you have some very eager and resourceful parents who, if you say you could do outdoor learning if you had a tent, they would buy the tent, you know, and that's not what we want, but.
I think we need to be also very careful that we still need to monitor health conditions and
Right.
Ultimately DC Health will have heavy influence on what happens in the months ahead. Now, I'm optimistic with, you know, another vaccine on the way, which I hope will help with the distribution as the Deputy Mayor highlighted that challenge. And, you know, I'm hopeful about a downward trend in cases. But again, our crystal ball hasn't always been clear through this health emergency in predicting what will happen.
Right.
But one way, again, we can expand is to think about the health conditions and our ratios, also outdoor learning, and then as teachers are prepared to return to the classroom, because ultimately we have to have the staffing for that as well.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor Kind, while I have you, last week at the, this week on Wednesday, during the COVID weekly call, I asked for clarification around the plan to allow LEAs to add teachers to the list who are not yet in person. I talked to the city administrator's office and they said a plan was forthcoming, but just in case you might have an update, I wanted to give you an opportunity to make some news on Friday.
Thank you, Councilmember. We've actually talked about this a little bit in your absence, and unfortunately, we didn't make news other than to say we're really committed to expanding eligibility.
Okay.
And we're working with DC Health just on all of the trade-offs they've got in front of them, and so we plan to talk about this more in the coming days.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Mendelson. Or if he's not here, oh no, never mind.
The chairman never leaves. Thank you, Councilmember Henderson. That's going to conclude the questions from council members. I want to note a couple of things. One, early in this hearing, I asked Deputy Mayor Kine if he would provide more detail of the plan, and he said yes. So if you would follow up with that. And I want to note for the folks who are watching, and I'm told that it's still over 50 people on the YouTube, the YouTube platform, that the record in this matter will close in 2 weeks. That is at 5 p.m. on March 12th. So anyone who wishes to submit a statement is welcome to do so, even though we limited the oral testimony. And finally, I want to note that the Committee of the Whole has scheduled its performance oversight hearings on the public education sector for March 9th and 10th. I believe they are full-day hearings, and the details regarding that are available through the council's website. I want to thank Deputy Mayor Kine, Superintendent Young, Dr. Walker Davis, and I'm probably forgetting somebody, yes, Chancellor Farabee, for your participation today. We may have some follow-up questions, and if so, we will get back in touch with you all. With that, the time is 6:48 in the afternoon,